Thank you. There we go. How you guys doing? You guys survived the storm of 2018? Well, we're in the middle of our series called More Than a Legend, and this series has come about with the realization that there are different people who have lots of different ideas about who Jesus is. And Pastor talked in the beginning of this series about some conversations and some interactions that he had with leaders of different faiths, but it's more than that, actually. Even within the church, the same church, we can have different ideas about who Jesus is, and we can have some thoughts and we can think some things about Christ that just aren't true. And so the question is, how do we figure this out? How do we get on the same page? The 1960 season of the Green Bay Packers ended with a heartbreaking defeat. When the Packers, they squandered a late lead in the fourth quarter, they lost the NFL championship, which is now we call the Super Bowl. And when you fast forward to the next season, the first day of training camp, their coach, Vince Lombardi, is standing in front of 36 professional athletes, and he begins with the most basic of statements. He's holding a ball in his hand, and he says, "Gentlemen, this is a football." Lombardi went back to the basics. And his team that season won the NFL championship, what we now call the Super Bowl, and started an NFL dynasty with Vince Lombardi and the Green Bay Packers. And that's exactly what this series is about. Let's get back to the basics. Instead of listening to everybody talk about who they think Jesus is, let's step back from all the fancy talk. Let's cut away from all of the spin and go straight to the source. Let's go to Jesus himself. Who does he say that he is? And for the last several weeks, we've highlighted different moments in Scripture where Jesus has revealed who he is in his own words, saying, "I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate. I am the good shepherd." And in the process, seeing him for who he really is. And here's the thing, when we see Jesus for who he really is, when we get our eyes on Scripture, on the gospel, when we find out who he is, we see what that means for us. Now, on any given Sunday, I understand we got lots of different people in here. We have lots of different people in this room. You might be a Christian. You might not be a Christian. But let me tell you how important this morning is. At the end of the story that I'm going to share with you today, after we talk about what we're going to talk about this morning, after it happened, the Jews decide that the story I'm going to share with you this morning, the Jews decide that this is the straw that breaks the camel's back. At the end of the passage we're going to talk about today, the Jews go to the high priest in Jerusalem and they say, if this fella Jesus keeps doing stuff like he's doing, if he keeps doing this, everybody's going to believe in him. So we need to end this. Let's take him out. This is the story right here that settles it. We're done with him. If he keeps doing stuff like this, that's the influence that this story we're going to talk about today, that's the influence that this story carries. So last week you heard Kim talk about what Jesus was saying in John 10, and he said, "I am the good shepherd," which immediately lets you know that everybody else is sheep. You might be a sheep in a nice house, but you're still a sheep. And the bad news is if Jesus is the good shepherd, then everyone else is simply a sheep, right? And so when we see Jesus as the good shepherd, what his role in our life is as shepherding, then we understand that there's a little bit of pressure that comes off our shoulders. When we understand that as a sheep, there's something that God is doing for us that we clearly can't do for ourselves. And so as we've just seen as we jump into our story in John 11, Jesus describes himself as the good shepherd. And in John 11, he's going to do some shepherding. But I have to say that as we look at John 11 this morning, it doesn't look at the immediate front like it's very good shepherding. But there's something in the story that we have to see that's just beyond what's on the surface. So let's jump into the story. It's John 11, verse 1 through 44. Let's start with verse 1. It says, now a certain man was ill. All right, let's pause right there. This was not a stranger. This was not some random fella. This was a certain specific man that got sick. And Jesus had just told everybody that he's the good shepherd, and so he's in Jerusalem, and basically the Pharisees get really offended because they don't really see themselves as sheep. They don't really like being called a sheep. They don't view themselves as a sheep. Maybe if he had been a little more stately, or maybe if Jesus had come a little more impressive, maybe if he looked a little bit more like the Messiah, they'd let him call him a sheep. But after Jesus explains himself as the good shepherd in John 10, these Jews aren't going to let him call them sheep. So they pick up rocks and they start to throw them at Jesus. They're going to stone him. But Jesus escapes and he leaves town and he crosses the Jordan River and he camps out at the place that John the Baptist initially baptized people. And it's the place that he's familiar with. He's familiar with the people there. He's hanging out. Let's keep going. It says, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So this is basically setting up the story for us, that the fellow who got sick, Jesus knows him really well. He's interacted with their family on multiple occasions. He has a pre-established relationship. And so this fellow's getting sick, and it's like a bigger deal than just a random person. You know, like when Jesus runs into the woman at the well, you know, he never met her before. Or the lady with the issue of blood, he didn't even really meet her. She just reached out and touched him. And she was healed. Those were strangers. Those were random people. And here we're finding out that this is someone that Jesus knows. He has a relationship. He loves them desperately, has gotten sick. This certain man has gotten sick. And so the sisters sent to him saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Now, okay, that sounds so cool when we read that in Scripture, right? But not if you're the messenger. Like, picture this story for a second. Like, this is before text messages, right? And most people in this room, you remember the phones with the actual cord that's connected to the wall, right? Before that. And you're married, imagine you're married at Martha's house and Lazarus is sick. And the doctors are saying, you know what, there's not really much we can do. And the family is struggling because it's not looking good. And you're trying to console them. You're saying, hey, if there's anything we can do, let me know. And Mary comes up to you and says, hey, remember we just said there's anything you can do? I got something for you to do. I got a message. I need you to find Jesus. I need you to go. I need you to find Jesus, and don't come back unless he's with you. Like, that's how they sent out messages before. You get someone and they go. And you didn't hop in your car and go. You walked. And so it wasn't like a 5-minute ride to the post office. It wasn't a short little jaunt across town and you're back. You didn't run up to Sacramento for an hour and come back. This was an excursion. And he goes, all right, I got it. This messenger, I can find him, right? I've heard this fella. He could do something about it. This is Jesus. This is the guy who did the water and wine thing, right? Yeah, okay, all right. And so you go and you start asking around, and you end up in Jerusalem because Jesus was just there and he had called people sheep. And everybody got upset and they were throwing rocks at him. And so they were still talking about it. Ever know how when you get upset about something, you talk about it for like a long time afterwards? Right? People are still talking about it. Because if you're that upset, it's hard to let things go. And so he rolls around, he finds, okay, he was in Jerusalem, and then he finds where he was at, and he's tracking him down, and you follow his trail across the Jordan, and you finally reach him, and you go to him, and you say, you know Mary and Martha, remember them? You love them. They have a special relationship with you. Well, their brother, Lazarus, is sick. And Jesus says, this illness is not going to end in death. And you go, oh, okay, that's good. I'm glad. Okay, cool. But like Mary and Martha, they want you. So can you just come back with me? And you can tell them yourself. And so Jesus says this illness doesn't lead to death, but he goes on to say, it is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Again, that's great. I could teach a lesson on the theology of this statement itself. To believe that this sickness was so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. But you're this fella, you're this messenger, and you're going, listen, okay, can you just hold on to that explanation for a second? Like, can you just hold it? Mary and Martha care about the explanation. I just need you to come with me. Can you just come with me? Can you come back to Bethany? Can you just, I don't know if you heard me or not, but Lazarus is sick. Can you just come back and talk to them? Let's keep reading. Verse 5 says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Now that's huge. That is so huge that it says that. Because the very next verse makes you think, I'm not sure. It's so huge that verse 5 says it. I love them. I love them. Because the very next verse is, really? Verse 6 says, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place that he was. He didn't move a muscle. We had just got through with Jesus saying, I'm the good shepherd. What do good shepherds do? Take care of the sheep. Lazarus gets sick. And we're like, okay, does that sound like good shepherding? I mean, we don't like it. We don't like it when our pastor doesn't show up at the hospital or fails to call us and pray with us over the phone during our medical issues. We'll talk about it and say that's not good shepherding. And the contrary is true. It means a lot to you when your pastor shows up at the hospital and calls us and prays with us during our medical issues. We will brag to the nurses. We will brag to our family. Our pastor is just the best. Because deep down we view that as good shepherding. And here we have Jesus. He finds out that his friend, he whom he loves, is sick, and the family is asking for him, and he doesn't go. So one of two things is happening here. Either we're all right and this isn't good shepherding. See, either that John 10 conversation that he's the good shepherd is like a complete waste of time. Or there's something going on here that's bigger than our initial emotional response, that we're going to have to work through and we're going to have to get to the bottom of. Get this, it's Jesus' love for Lazarus that causes him not to go help him. I don't know about you, but that does not make much sense to me. Because if I send a message to Jesus that I need him to come, and he stays right where he is, I'd be grilling the messenger. Like, maybe he didn't understand you. Like, Mary and Martha are like, did you tell him it was Lazarus? Like, did you tell him it was Lazarus? Yeah, I told him. He stayed exactly where he was. He wouldn't come. Verse 7, then after he said this to the disciples, let us go to Judea again, which is the area where Jerusalem was and Bethany was. And verse 8 says, the disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you. Are you going there again? And Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, does he not stumble because he sees the light of this world? But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. Verse 11, after saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus. Again, this is his friend. It's not a stranger. It's not some random person. This is my friend Lazarus, has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. And the disciples said to him, Lord, if he's just fallen asleep, he's going to wake up. He's going to recover. I've seen it happen. People fall asleep, they wake up. Now, this would be me in this story. I'd be like, okay, I know you're God, but if he just fell asleep, he's probably going to wake up on his own. I'm not sure why you have to go to wake him up. And if you go back there, you're going to die because this is near the place that you just went and they tried to stone you. Verse 13, now Jesus has spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly. Have you ever tried to communicate with someone who just didn't get it? My girls call this life with dad. Because I don't get half the stuff they're talking about. But it's like where you're talking to somebody and they're like literally 10 steps behind you. And there comes a point where you have to stop and you have to break it down for them because they're not getting it. And this is the point where most people get annoyed. And it's in the explaining. And this is where Jesus is at. And it's the same. He's telling the disciples, he told them plainly, Lazarus has died. And for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there so that you believe. Okay, so maybe this good shepherding thing is taking on something new. Maybe this is about to develop into something because otherwise he would have just gone. If he finds out Lazarus is sick, he goes to see him. But he says to his disciples, I'm glad I wasn't there because now you will actually believe. And then I'll believe what? We believe. What are you talking about? Verse 16, so Thomas, called the twin, said to his disciples, well, let us all go, that we all may die with him. This is like that line from every action movie, right? Where the team of good guys is facing insurmountable odds, certain death, and the leader, the hero, says, I'm going in. And then the rest of the group, slowly, one by one, start to stand. I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. But there's always that last one who waits. There's always that last one who says, all right, you're all going to die, right? This is a suicide mission, right? We're all going to, all right, I'm in. Verse 17, now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews, probably some of the same ones that tried to kill Jesus, had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. Now, part of me is skeptical. I know they're there to console, but I think some of them are also there to say, I told you, sweetheart. I told you. If Jesus could have done something about it, he didn't. Lazarus has been dead 4 days. He's not the guy you thought he was. We told you. And look what happens, verse 20. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to him and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Have you ever met a really mad woman? Don't point. So Martha goes to meet Jesus, but Mary stays seated exactly where she is. And I can imagine why, because Mary made every effort to let Jesus know that her brother Lazarus was sick. And she doesn't understand why. Why did Jesus not come? Why did he move a month? Why did he stay? So here's Mary at the house, and if you've ever been in a funeral, there's food everywhere. And imagine she's just going, no, do not make him a plate. No, he didn't come. No, he didn't come when we sent for him. And if he would have showed up, we wouldn't be having this funeral right now. So she's staying on the couch. Oh, and he wants to come now, Mr. Walk on Water? Well, did he have another friend who got sick and died? See, she's just like us. She gets frustrated that when she needed Jesus the most, and he didn't move. But look what Martha does. He's not even in the village yet. He's not even in the town yet. And I imagine she's running. She's running to see him. She's hysterical. Her brother's dead. And with every bit of emotion, she says it here in verse 21. She says, Lord, if you had been there. If you'd just been there. If you would have just been there. And the reason I can empathize with them is because I've said those very same words myself. And you have too. If you would have just been there, my marriage would have worked. Because God knows I prayed enough. If you would have just been there, we wouldn't have lost this baby. Because God knows we were in the hospital and we were weeping on our hands and knees, praying and begging for you to show up. Lord, if you would have been there, then this teenager wouldn't have walked into that high school and killed 17 innocent kids. If you would have just been there, we wouldn't be going through this. We wouldn't be facing this. We wouldn't be walking this road. We wouldn't be dealing with this. And you can play the church game where you show up and you pretend that you and God are on good terms all the time. But every single one of us has had the moment, and if you haven't, then you will, where you say to God, if you had just been there. My life would be different right now. And it's okay to be angry. And it's okay to be upset, because here's what I know. Grieving in the church world, we've created this culture where you can't be upset and you're not allowed to be mad. You're not allowed to be confused. You're not allowed to be frustrated. It's just suck it up and move on. But grieving is one of the things that God encourages us to do. Be mad. Wrestle with him. And if there's something that you don't understand, don't go to social media and complain. Get on your knees and prayer and tell God, you don't understand. Look what Martha does, because this is us in the life of Martha. Verse 21, she says to Jesus, if you would have been there, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. See, look how quick her grieving was replaced with hope. See, one of the things that sets us apart from those who aren't believers in God is that we grieve. Yes, we feel hurt, we feel pain. Yes, we struggle with emotions and we grieve, but never without hope. And there has to come a time where the disappointment that you feel because of what God didn't do is replaced with the hope that you have in what he can do. There has to come a time when what you feel is replaced by what you know. And let me tell you what I know. Pain is not your boss. Pain is not your boss, it's your employee. And your hurt and your pain and your frustration and your confusion, it may not clock in when you tell it to. But when it is on the job, it is doing exactly what God intends for it. Because he is creating inside of you a capacity to be close with God in a way that if it wasn't there, God would have never allowed that pain to be there in the first place. I'm going to tell you that again. And I want that just to sink in. Pain is not your boss. It is your employee. And when it is on the job, it is doing exactly what God intends for it to do. He is creating inside of you a capacity to be close with God in a way that if it wasn't there, that if it wouldn't do that, God would never have allowed that pain to be there in the first place. And so Jesus looks at Martha and looks what happens. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Now we got to unpack that. Because when she replies, when Jesus says that to her, it's kind of like a duh kind of a moment. Well, yeah. Listen to how she responds to him after he says that. She says, I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Now pause here. Martha believes wholeheartedly in something that we have to make sure that we leave church this morning believing in. Every single human being, before everything is all said and done, is going to rise again on that last day. This is called the resurrection. Those of us on earth, with the moments that we have had, who choose to love Jesus, honor Jesus, worship Jesus, turn our lives over to him, submit to his will, we will be resurrected with a new body to live in eternity with him forever. Amen. Those of us on earth, with the moments that we have had, who choose to create a life without Jesus, we wanted to do it our own way. We wanted to be our own God. We didn't want to submit to anybody. We will get our last day exactly what we have spent our life trying to create. We will get forever without God. We will spend eternity without God. Which is why, church, that what we do matters. There should be an urgency about us. That our kids come to a belief in Jesus Christ. That our family come to a belief in Jesus Christ. That our friends come to a belief in Jesus Christ. And the reason this urgency exists is because of the resurrection. And so Jesus says, your brother's going to rise again. And Martha says, I know he's going to come back on the last day. But look at what Jesus says in response. I am the resurrection. Jesus looks at Martha, he says, this thing you're hoping for is here right now. The resurrection is not an event, Martha, it's a person, and I'm here. And not only am I the resurrection, I am the life, and the life that you're going to live when you're resurrected. Now, every single person, we've been there when someone has said something. They've said all the right things, but now they have to back it up. He says, Martha, I am the resurrection. Like, if you're going to say that, then what happens in the next 18 verses, like, better get serious. Verse 25, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. You'll never taste death if you belong to Jesus. Do you understand this? You may die. But in that instant, you're immediately joined with God forever. It's eternal life. It's life without interruption. And if you believe this, if you believe in Jesus, that he is the resurrection and he is the life, then this is the hope that you have. And nobody and nothing can take that from you. So Jesus says to Martha, he says, do you believe this? She says, yes. I believe you're the Christ. I believe you're the Son of God who is coming to this world. And when she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, hey, the teacher's here. He's calling you. Jesus is here. He wants to see you. And this is where it gets real for Mary, because Mary was upset. She's mad. That quiet anger. The I'm not going to talk anger. I'm staying on the couch. You can come to me anger. But Mary can't put on this front anymore because Jesus is here. And here's the thing. If you're going to have issues with Jesus, you're going to have him to his face. We like to have issues with people sometimes in private. And that's not the way to handle things. It's okay to have issues. It's okay to have struggles. It's okay to not initially be on the same page. But you got to go to their face. And Mary had to be confronted with Jesus. Verse 29, when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Jesus had not yet come to the village. He was still in the place that Martha had met him. And when the Jews who were there in the house, consoling her, saw that Mary got up quickly and went out, they followed her. They supposed that she was going to the tomb to weep. See, the Jews that were with her, they were there with Mary, and she got up quickly and she left. And they're like, what's going on? They wanted to find out. So they go with her. They find out that she's with Jesus, and they're following her, and they're thinking she's going to have another moment. Go to the tomb and have another moment. But when Mary came to Jesus where he was and she saw him, listen, all of her anger in that moment disappears. And she falls at his feet, and this is what she says to him. Listen, it's the same thing that Martha said to him. If you would have been there, if you just would have been there, my brother would not have died. And at this point, I want you to put yourself in Jesus' shoes. I want you to feel the emotion that he has here, because Jesus knows exactly what's going to happen. He knows exactly how this story is going to end. And here he has this family and these women that he cares so deeply about, and he's invested in their life, and one by one they come to him, and they are just hurt. And they are just broken. And they are just upset. And it says here, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit. He was greatly troubled. He said, where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. And as he walked, in verse 35, it says, Jesus wept. I don't know. I don't know whether he cried because he was empathizing for what this family was having to walk through and the struggles that they were going through. I don't understand. Oh, I got it back. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know, but this is the most powerful individual to ever walk the face of the earth, who opens his mouth and dead things come to life, who reaches out his hand and touches things and they live again. This is the fellow that decided the ground was a little bit too hard for him to walk on, and so he decided he was going to take a lake as his path. This is the fellow who walked by a man whose eyes didn't work, and he decides that now is the time for those eyes to work again. The most authoritative of all gods, the most powerful, still to this day, the most argued being in all of history. So much so that when you mention the name of Jesus, they either care about you or they hate you because of this Jesus. Let me just pause for a second and say, we all watched in January how the rain fell in Montecito in Santa Barbara County. And how in the middle of the night, an entire mountainside slid off, full of homes, things, and even some people just gone. All it was some dirt and some water. The most basic of components in life. And in a moment, the power that can have to take what man has built and reduce it to nothing. Everything that people had worked for, gone. It's gone. And you look at the power of nature and how huge it really is. And yet Jesus was infinitely more powerful. Yet here he is standing with the woman that he loves and he's crying. Like, just let that sink in for a minute. That this is the most authoritative of all figures, yet with the most tender, with the ability to feel what we feel and know the hurt that exists. And so Jesus cries. No, it says he weeps. So the Jews said, see how he loved him? But there's always haters. There's always haters. Verse 37, but someone said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also kept this man from dying? They don't get it. They don't get it. And that's part of why I think Jesus is crying, because they just don't get it. Of course he could have kept him from dying. Of course he could have kept your marriage from falling apart. Of course you could have kept your loved one from getting sick. You could have. But they just didn't get it. And he's exhausted from having to try and explain over and over and over again. I'm going to let some things happen. that if you choose to believe, you're going to see and you're going to experience something that you never would if I didn't let it happen. But sometimes that pain is so real, it's so big, it's so tangible that it prevents them from seeing what God is about to do. Verse 38, then Jesus, deeply moved again, he came to the tomb. It was a cave, and there was a stone that lay against it. And Jesus gets to this tomb with this cave, and there's a big stone in front of it. And I can imagine him getting a snapshot of what's going to be happening in the next couple of weeks. Nobody else knows this. He's tried to tell them, but they just don't get it. And this is the scene that he's standing in front of. And look what he says. Jesus says, verse 39, take away the stone. Now, Jesus said, I am the resurrection and I am the life. But it was just him and Martha and a couple of disciples out there. But now there are hundreds of eyewitnesses. Okay, those of us who are skeptical, listen to me. The reason why we believe the Bible is that there are hundreds of people watching this story unfold. There are hundreds of people there. John isn't writing this all down in a vacuum. There are hundreds of people that would have been at this funeral that have seen these events, and they are here now to see what Jesus is about to say. And he walks right up to the tomb and he says, I know you're all sad, but get this stone out of the way. I know you're feeling it right now, but let's get rid of the stone. And if you've heard this story before, you're getting excited. But Martha is living this real time. And she still doesn't get it. Look what she says. She says, Lord, by this time there's going to be an odor. Because he's been dead for 4 days. And so she's thinking he's going to stink. Like, I don't want to get mad at her, but I don't get it either. I would have been the same way. I don't know what's going to happen, but let's not be disrespectful. It's my brother. 4 days is significant because they didn't have EKGs, they didn't have EEGs, they couldn't, run a test on his heart or on his brain and tell if for certain he was dead. So after the first 48 hours, rigor mortis would have set in. After 72 hours, after 3 days, rigor mortis is gone. The body is going limp. Blood is starting to pool up. There is going to be some rot. Some decay is starting to happen. He's going to stink. And Martha's afraid after all this, you're going to open the tomb, and it's going to be embarrassing. Standing beside her are all these Jews, and some of them maybe even were the ones trying to kill Jesus, and they're already skeptical of everything that's going on, and they're not convinced that this is going to be the guy. And look what happens. And Jesus turns to Martha and he says, did I not tell you? Didn't I look you in the eyeball and I tell you? We just had this conversation just outside of town. I looked you in the eye and I told you. That if you believed, you would see the glory of God. Verse 41, they took the stone away. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you would always hear me. But I say this on the account of those people standing around. There's people. It's not just a couple people. There's a lot of people. I say this so they may believe you have sent me. And when he had said these things, he cried out in a loud voice,
Lazarus, come out!
I don't know how Jesus' voice would have been. I don't think I could say that. So I found someone with a more regal voice to say it for me. Now, wait a minute, you're a skeptic. You're not sure. And here's this fella standing right outside the tomb. He just made him roll the rock away. And he says,
Lazarus!
Like, what do you do now? Like, one of two things is about to happen. Either Jesus is a liar, and you're going to get to completely forget him because his life doesn't matter at this point. Or something crazy is about to happen, and your whole life of skepticism is going down the drain, and you hear Jesus say,
Lazarus!
And everybody looks around, and the stone is gone, and the skeptics are sweating, and Mary and Martha are probably still crying, and you don't know what's about to happen. And he says this,
Come out!
come out. I don't know if he yelled it. I don't know if he said it softly. I don't know how he said it, but he said, come out. He called him by name and he said, come out. It's not over. There's still more life to live. Let's go. Come out here. Come out. Come out. And I want to tell you, in verse 44 of John chapter 11, if verse 44 doesn't exist, then Christians are the most pitiful people on the planet. If verse 44 doesn't exist, then this whole thing is a show. We've had the wool pulled over our eyes. It's all a big mistake. But you want to know the good news? Why don't you stand with me this morning and I'll tell you. The good news is there is a verse 44. It says, the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen straps, his face wrapped with a cloth. And he stinks. I'm sure he does. He's been in there for 4 days. This dead guy walks out of a tomb. And here's where we finish the story. Jesus said to them, he turns around, he looks at all the people gathering there, and those skeptics and those critics and those doubters, all those who did not believe. He tells them, hey, you go unbind him. Let him go. Pull the cloths off of him. Take the straps off of him. Take the funeral garb off this man. These people who didn't believe, had just talked about Jesus like he was nobody, had to untie the dead guy who had just come back to life. And this is what I'm going to end on this morning, because this is what I think Jesus would say to us today. Your marriage that you think is broken, come out. Your relationship with your kids that you think is done, come out. whatever your situation, whatever your circumstance, everyone has said there's nothing that you can do. It is what it is. They've thrown up their hands. You've given up. Whatever relationship that refers to, whatever circumstance that refers to, there's no other options. It's time to hear the voice that matters this morning. And Jesus says it's time to come out. The worship team is going to go into this song. The altars are open. It is time to allow Jesus to call some things to life that we've been living like they're dead. It's time to declare who He is. Jesus is the resurrection, and He's here, and it means that you can live life now because He brought the kingdom here. Let's pray.
By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. Your resurrected King is resurrecting Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King.
Heavenly Father, may you just cover this place this morning. Those in this room, all those in the sound of my voice, that God, you would draw near to them. That God, you would remind them that the same God that we just shared the story of your Son and what he did in the life of this family, it's the same God who can do that in our life. You're bigger, you're stronger, you're more powerful, you're able to do anything. And so, Father, I pray that you encourage us, not with the smooth words of another, not with any of these other things we look to, but God, would you just encourage us by your Spirit? May there just be a peace in our life as we walk through these doors. As we head out to our car, we re-engage with our world and what we got going on, our job and our families and our friends and our kids and our spouse. And would you just give us a peace? Would you just give us an understanding that although we may be confused, we may not get it, and we know that you are working something out in us. That you are creating a closeness with you through some of the pain that we walk through. That ultimately you're calling things to life in our world. And if we would just keep our eyes on you, and if we would just continue to believe and to live our life honoring you, that you will bring honor to us. Remind some in this room that you love them. You've not given up on them. Encourage them and give them peace. In Jesus' name. The altars are still open. The worship team's going to keep playing. If you got to go, you got to go. And if you don't, then just